The autumn wind is a pirate, blustering in from sea. With a rollicking song he sweeps along, swaggering boisterously. His face is weather-beaten. He wears a hooded sash, with a silver hat about his head, and a bristling black mustache. He growls as he storms the country, a villain big and bold. And the trees all shake and quiver and quake as he robs them of their gold. The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks. Great cash, homie.
Run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast,
Welcome to the Week 10 edition of the Rearview Mirror podcast. This is the podcast where we break down everything that happened in Week 9 in our rearview mirror. We try to get a better understanding of not just who won and who lost, but why they won and why they lost, looking deeper than just the score, looking deeper than just the box score, getting into some of the advanced metrics and analytics and try to really find out who performed well but maybe it didn't show up on the scoreboard, who did not perform well but maybe walked away with a victory due to turnovers or some other reasoning due to failures from the other team as opposed to as a result of solid play from themselves. We're also going to look at all of these factors because we want to find out if there's value in the Week 10 card, where that value lies, who has the edges here in Week 10. And we're going to break all of those games down for you in a minute. Just before we get down into the weekly headlines, I do want to mention one quick announcement. This week, as I do pretty much every single year, there's been a week where I'll go ahead and give people a free week preview into what I'm doing. And this week is the week for the NFL season. I'm giving free Week 10 access to all of my client recommendations this week. It's very simple to get those. It's only for NFL plays and recommendations. And you go to the website, sharpfootballanalysis.com, go to the purchase page, and you will see a special NFL-only Week 10 free preview package. That's what you want to grab. It's $1. It has to cost something so that you can actually check out at the cart. It will not let you check out if it's completely for free. That'll get you all the access that you need behind the scenes. You'll get all the pre-release announcements. You'll get all the client information that I send out, as well as all the recommendations, of course, and games that we're going to be betting for Sunday. And so I will be refunding those $1 purchases on Monday morning, so don't worry, it is 100% free. But this is the week if you ever wanted to see what my NFL write-ups look like for clients, what my analysis looks like, you're in luck because this is the week to check it out. So go to sharpfootballanalysis.com and you can get the NFL week for free this week. On to the weekly headlines. Story number one, the bye week is not helping. What are we seeing so far this year with teams that are coming off of a bye? They've actually lost 10 out of 14 games. It means they've only won 4 out of 14 or 29% of the time. That means they're losing over 70% of the games when they come off of a bye. And these teams are not huge dogs either that they should be losing that much. They're actually on average a pick 'em, which means they should be closer to 50%. Yet somehow they're losing over 70% of their games. Against the spread, they're only covering 43%. This is a big deviation from what we've seen historically. Let's look back at some of the history, and I'll just throw out one subset. You guys can slice it and dice it till your heart's content if you want, but I'm only going to look here at home favorites that are coming off of a bye. From 2001 through 2010, we have over 120 games in this subset of teams that are coming off of a bye during the season. In that period of time, those teams won 75% of their games, and they covered 60% of their games. This year, obviously, I just recited what those numbers were. They're actually losing 70% of their games, whereas they were winning 75% previously. Now, you can look at the last 3 years. Since 2011, teams that are coming off of bye are only covering 48.5% of the time. That obviously includes what they're doing this year and includes 2011, 12, and 13. These teams are only covering 48.5%, whereas previously, in a larger sample size, up through and including 2010, they were covering 60%. That's a huge swing right there. Now, what's the reasoning for that? It's pretty obvious, but let's go ahead and throw it out there anyways. It's a collective bargaining agreement. The new rules preclude the players from having a lot of involvement during their bye week, from getting out there practicing and doing things with the team, organized team activities, things like that are off limits right now. So what you have is most of the time, unless a player is really married to the game, such as like a Peyton Manning or somebody like that who's always thinking about football and always working on things, and maybe he's practicing on his own, you're having guys kicking it back with their family, kicking it back with their friends, going on trips, going to the store, relaxing at home, going to the movies, all types of things. Just taking their mind completely off of football. And in that situation, what you have is you have somebody who is basically doing nothing for a week, coming back the following week and starting to work out and watch film again, whereas you're playing an opponent who was focused, had a game 6 days ago, was in receiving treatment, was in the facility watching film the very next week, at the beginning of the week, and then has been working out and practicing with the team. These guys are sharper, these guys are more focused, and it's definitely becoming a detriment for teams that are coming off of a bye. The reason that is more a factor now is we've had 14 of 32 teams come off a bye so far. That means we still have the vast majority of teams have yet to come off of a bye. And while we had a lot of teams on bye week 4 that came back week 5, the last several weeks, from week 6 onward, from week 6, 7, 8, and 9, we had 2 teams each week that came off of a bye. And the actual record for the teams straight up that have come off a bye since week 6 is actually only 1-7 straight up. 1-7 straight up from week 6 onward is the record of the teams that are coming off of a bye. We have a lot of teams that are coming off a bye this week. We have a lot in week 11, and we've got 4 in week 12, and that's when the byes, teams coming off of a bye will end. So really look at these games. I'll throw out the names of the teams that are playing and coming off of bye this week. Buffalo Bills host the Kansas City Chiefs. The Atlanta Falcons go to Tampa Bay. The Detroit Lions host the Miami Dolphins, and the Tennessee Titans go to Baltimore. The 2 other teams that are off a bye this week play each other. The Packers and the Bears both were on a bye last week, so that kind of cancels it out. I'm not suggesting you 100% fade all of these teams, but it is something that you should factor in. Whereas before, coming off of a bye would maybe reasoning to help support or back a team or give you an extra benefit. In this situation, today's NFL, take that out of the equation. You should not be factoring in, oh, well, they also had extra time to prepare because they were on a bye. If anybody tells you that, they are not studying football. If you hear anybody from this day onward or this entire season, whatever, talk about the bye and say, oh, well, this team's off of a bye, so they should be X, Y, and Z. You need to really revisit the way that you're viewing this person and what they're telling you and how informed they are, because they're talking about things that happened in the past years ago. As I told you, since 2011, these teams are only winning 48.5%, or they're only covering 48.5% of their games. So even the last few years, that wasn't a good angle to follow, but it's particularly a terrible angle to follow this year. So think twice if anybody tells you that you should support a team because they're off of a bye. Story number 2, in-season trending. That's a theme for this week. Last week, you listened to the podcast, you learned that the theme that we were talking about last week was strength of schedule, how important it is to start factoring that into strength of schedule. Now we're going to talk about in-season trends and how important it is to factor in the most recent games and as opposed to the entire body of work over the course of the season. And that's because right now we're sitting at week 10 and teams change. Teams' strategies change. They've got better acclimation to their players. They know how to call plays better. They might know how to do things better. They might have to change due to injury or incorporating new players and that type of thing. So one team I'm going to look at is obvious, which one we should talk about right now, I think. That's the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers are much different now than they were week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. The reason being, they had a great wide receiving weapon that they weren't using at all, Martavis Bryant. This guy's tall, he's quick, but they weren't getting him into the game because he's young and he couldn't understand and get down the no-huddle packages. So what the Steelers decided to do after they got crushed in Cleveland and lost 31-10, and they went 0 for 3 in the red zone. They had no luck in the red zone. The team was terrible inside the red zone. What they decided to do is, we are going to stop using more no-huddle. We're going to go back to more huddle situations. We're going to get Martavis Bryant more involved in the game. We're going to actually start throwing the ball to this kid. We're going to actually start playing him in games. And we're going to use some schemes that help give Big Ben more protection in the pocket. We're going to use max protection schemes. We're going to send fewer wide receivers out in the routes, and we're going to look for some bigger chunk plays down the field. And that's what they did in the last 3 weeks. We already know he's been through 12 touchdowns the last 2 games. That's an NFL record. But this team is definitely attacking things totally different right now than they were week 1 and 2. So why in the world would you factor in what this team did in week 1 or 2 when you're projecting what you think they're going to do against the Jets or further down their schedule? You should not. You have to incorporate it to a small degree, but you really have to know what periods to slice and dice, and for every team it's going to be different. Every team you're going to need to factor in a different split for when this team may or may not have changed. Now, some teams haven't really changed. Some defenses haven't lost players. So you don't need to go back and factor in anything. You can look more at their larger body of work and maybe pay a little bit more attention to what they've done recently. In all situations when you're looking at trends, however, I want to weigh this heavily. As I mentioned last week, you have to factor in strength of schedule. You can't just look at a small sample size of a few weeks and say, wow, look at what this team's doing, and completely ignore that they might have played a couple of jokes in their schedule. You have to look at the strength of schedule of their opposition in addition to incorporating how teams are trending. Story number 3, new quarterbacks being introduced. This really plays off of story number 2 with the trends situation. You've got a lot of quarterbacks that are starting games now, so pay attention to these guys. Mettenberger, Mallett down in Houston, Sanchez out in Philadelphia. McCown is back now in Tampa Bay. Vic is still starting this week again for the Jets, and RG3 is back after injury for the Washington Redskins. All of these players being reintroduced have to cause you to make some sort of adjustments in the form of not just from the player's perspective, but coaches call things differently for different players. Coaches might call different protection schemes. Coaches might be more aggressive, less aggressive. In some situations where the team is terrible, they might try to help their quarterback a little bit more. Other coaches where their team's terrible might just try to press the guy and see what he can do. So you really have to look at it on a case-by-case, individual basis. But obviously I want to caution you when you're looking at let's say Tampa Bay, for instance. What do we know about Mike Glennon? I've told you this many times on the podcast. The guy would push the ball way down the field, and that's obviously a good thing to be aggressive. He obviously didn't fare particularly well overall, so that's why he's going back to the bench. Josh McCown might not be pushing the ball quite as far and deep down the field. So you have to factor that into your handicapping of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers moving forward. Obviously, as always, the key is get ahead of the game, get ahead of the market, be able to predict what's going to happen before it actually does happen, so that instead of just incorporating numbers from these guys in a few weeks and saying, oh, hey, by the way, Josh McCown now isn't doing this, and so we'll project this for weeks 14 and 15. You want to already try to incorporate that now so that you can get ahead of the line makers, because I guarantee you a lot of these line makers are putting out numbers that are more in tune with year-to-date data as opposed to really factoring heavily some of these more recent trends. Story number 4, last one before we move on to breaking down these games, which is the real fun part of this podcast. I want to talk about stats that seem too good to be true. At this point in time in the season, we are at a point where there's more statistics and more data out there. It's good in some ways, obviously. My record and my results are generally really, really strong week 12 onward because I have more data to work with. I've got more analytics to incorporate into my algorithms. And so I've got a long-standing track record of doing 60% and much more than that to close the season out in both pro and college football. However, what we do see at this point in time is people trying to be smart in the media, whether it's mainstream media, whether it's small market newspapers, whatever it is, and make headlines by posting dumb comments or dumb things that don't really mean anything, just sound interesting. For instance, I literally 5 minutes ago saw a tweet that said, Jay Cutler has an 83% completion rate when targeting Matt Forte. Who cares? This is a running back. He is getting dump-off passes, for the most part, out of the backfield. The reason you're throwing it to him is because the guys down the field are covered and he's open. And he's standing a few yards from you. So, of course, he should have a high completion rate. The other reason you might be throwing it to him is because you're getting blitzed by a ton of pass rushers who are not marking him. They're not guarding the receiver, the running back out in the flat. They're trying to sack the quarterback because it's all out blitz or something. So Cutler's just tossing the ball to him, standing there wide open, so he doesn't get sacked. That doesn't mean anything to me. So that's a prime example of a ridiculous statistic. As if they should throw the ball more to Matt Forte because Cutler completes 83% of the passes to him. It just makes no sense. Another statistic, obviously you guys know where I stand on something like this. The Dallas Cowboys are 18-1 when DeMarco Murray has 20 carries. In the last 2 weeks, he only had 19 carries, so that's why they lost the game. I don't know if those are the exact specific numbers or not. It was a tweet that was similar to that, and I've seen several of them. Of course, that's moronic. People don't understand or care to take a second to think critically about what they're about to say out of their mouth. They don't have any idea about correlation versus causation, and they're just trying to throw something out there that sounds interesting. I don't hate them for doing that. It's just not very intelligent. They're looking for either retweets or they're trying to sell their newspaper ads or space on their internet site, whatever they're trying to do. But the bottom line here is that these, for your case and for my case, you really have to look and think critically about why could this be a factor or not? What could be helpful about the statistic, or why is it completely irrelevant? And factor that in. That's the more important thing. It also, now that we're looking at several weeks, you're going to see a lot of these media guys talk about what somebody's done the last couple of weeks, like a Big Ben, for instance. Now, you have to play in mind the defense that he's gone up against. Of course, we know that the last 2 teams that he's played, which were the Indianapolis Colts and the Baltimore Ravens, both those teams had key injuries at cornerback. The Miami Dolphins the Indianapolis Colts lost Vontae Davis during that game. He was the number 1 cover corner. He couldn't play. And when you look at the other side of the ball and you look at the Baltimore Ravens, they were without their number 1 cover corner as well. So, obviously Big Ben, great statistics, but bear that in mind. These guys have lost corners. Now, you asked me about the New York Jets. Their corners stink, probably worse than both of those teams combined. So that might not be a factor this week, but something to consider moving forward about strength of schedule, who these teams are playing, and that sort of thing. When you're talking about somebody's short-term statistics that somebody wants to share with you, really think critically about that. Stats and charts, let's jump right in here. We're going to cover two things today. We're going to cover early down success rate, and we're going to cover some of the NFL project analytics. But for now, early down success rate, let's talk about the best teams and the worst teams in terms of offense. We still have the same top five. I won't really discuss them much. The risers are the Miami Dolphins. This is a team definitely on the rise offensively. I think they are trending strongly in the right direction. Then you've got the Denver Broncos. They put up tremendous numbers, even in that loss up in New England last week, which we'll talk about when we get down to the part where we're breaking down their game. New Orleans Saints also had a tremendous week last week. And on the downside, the bottom five teams. Let's jump to a team who did terrible last week, and that was the Carolina Panthers. They're not yet bottom five offensively, but there was a real dichotomy there in their last game. The New Orleans Saints offense was tremendous in terms of early down success rate. They were the second best last week. They had 27 first downs, only went to third down 13 times, whereas the Panthers, 15 first downs, went to third down 14 times. That was the second worst early down success rate of the week, and so you could see why that game was such a blowout, 28-10, one-sided ball game in favor of the New Orleans Saints. It was because of that early down success rate. Other teams that are falling, San Francisco 49ers, that offense, I really don't know how Harbaugh is dealing with those guys and who's really to take all the blame or if it's to be divided up. But that offense is not playing very well whatsoever. And the San Diego Chargers, another very bad performance offensively, obviously, against that Miami Dolphins last week. Let's flip over to the defenses. Talk about the top five defenses. We are dealing with the Dolphins, Jets, Ravens, Jaguars, and Seahawks. Easy for me on this graphic. I didn't have to update any of the teams on the top or bottom five. We're still looking at pretty much the same slate that we dealt with before. We are seeing the Washington Redskins move up in terms of their defensive performance. In terms of a team that's falling that was added to this list was the Cincinnati Bengals. This team, although they did get the win against the Baltimore Ravens, we'll talk a little bit more about that game, but the Cincinnati Bengals, definitely a team that has some concerns. They were able to obviously beat the Baltimore Ravens, and they obviously were able to get by the Jacksonville Jaguars this past weekend, although they didn't cover the spread in that spot. They still won the game, but the Jaguars were able to do okay from an early down success rate against this defense, and now they have to go ahead and play the Cleveland Browns here on Thursday night. So that's your top five and bottom five defenses. Let's jump right now into NFLproject.com's latest and most recent projections for the rest of the season as it will play out based upon prior results as well as future results forecasting through Week 17, who is going to make the playoffs and where they are going to play their games. This is obviously different, as I said before, from what you see at a lot of these other sites where they are just telling you if the playoffs ended today, here's what would happen. This is a lot more advanced feature looking at projecting the outcomes of games in the future based upon a number of factors and crunching the data. I don't know all the details about it, but the bottom line here, let's first start in the AFC. And the easiest way to walk through this, I think let's go ahead and jump and look at the graphic that just simply compares last week's data to this week's data because we have that for us. So let's just flash it up here. Off to the right is last week's data. To the left is this week's data, and I think this is going to be a permanent feature here in this section because it's fascinating to look at the teams that are moving up and down. We are still seeing, let's talk about the AFC first, the Denver Broncos as the number one seed. However, looking at the specific numbers, it is very marginal. It is basically a couple of percentage points between having the New England Patriots be the number one seed. So this is a very, very tight race in the AFC. Obviously going to be very hotly contested by both of these teams. So when you think, oh, well, the Denver Broncos, they're going to, in a few weeks, some people are going to think, well, Denver Broncos, they're doing okay. No, this team is going to be fighting tooth and nail to avoid having to go back to Foxborough. And right now they do control their destiny. If they continue to win these games, it looks like that they are going to be forecasted to be the number one seed. But that remains to be seen based upon what New England does and obviously what Denver does. But based upon this algorithm, it is saying Denver, by a couple of percentage points, should be the number one seed. Obviously, they hosted New England in last year's playoffs and won and made it to the Super Bowl. If they have to go to New England instead, big difference. Look down to the AFC wildcard games. The first matchup doesn't change. Bengals won last week. Colts won. Both those teams still slated for the third and the sixth seed, respectively. But now the bottom matchup has changed. Based upon results of last week, we saw the Pittsburgh Steelers beat the Baltimore Ravens, and that has now allowed the Pittsburgh Steelers to be projected as the number one team from the AFC North. That would mean the Cincinnati Bengals obviously are number two seed, which is what they were before, but they were not able to move up to number one just because the Ravens lost. The Steelers actually leapfrogged them. So the games between the Steelers and the Bengals later this year are going to be very important for that division. This AFC North is going to come down to the very end because the Cleveland Browns are not far off the mark either, and that game on Thursday definitely has playoff implications. Then you have the Chargers. Their decline is going to be demonstrated in a second on another graphic, but the Kansas City Chiefs jumped ahead of them. Neither of those teams, it looks like it's in any position whatsoever to win the AFC West, so they're fighting for that fifth playoff seed right now. Moving over to the NFC, That loss by the Dallas Cowboys this past weekend to the Arizona Cardinals was big. It was big for both teams. It pushed the Dallas Cowboys out of a first-round bye, and they are now projected to still make the playoffs, but as a sixth-round seed on the road in Green Bay instead of hosting the playoffs and having a bye the first round of the playoffs. That's obviously big. The reason the Cowboys dropped so dramatically from that loss, I believe, is likely because that's their second straight home game they lost, and home games you need to try to win. And now they have a ton of road games coming up as well. So they're making it much more difficult on themselves, and that pushed them out. The Eagles are now back up to the number one seed or the top team from the NFC East and the second overall seed for the playoffs. We see the Green Bay Packers have leapfrogged the Detroit Lions, and now the Detroit Lions are actually fighting with the Cowboys to make the playoffs as that number 6 seed, but the Detroit Lions are just outside the door. The 5th seed, Seattle Seahawks, did not change whatsoever, so they're still there. Same thing with the New Orleans Saints. So that matchup is intact. We just see the 6th and the 3rd seed change in this grouping here. Let's take a closer look at that Cowboys and Eagles and how they leapfrogged one another. You can see initially it was the Eagles who were going to be projected in this division. Then the Cowboys surged, and since then the Cowboys have fallen off, and just after this past weekend we see that the Eagles have now taken back command of that division. And then moving over to the AFC West, another interesting battle. The Chargers were so far out in front, looking secured to win that last playoff spot, because the Broncos are probably going to win the division, but they were locked into one of those AFC wildcard spots. But with a bunch of losses and with the Chiefs being very consistent, Chargers have now fallen behind them. Next graphic, you can really just take a look at the two teams as they've fallen off. And finally, we can look at this final graphic. You can see how the playoff seeds are being determined in the lower left-hand portion, as well as the true odds to win the division, and really see what type of separation the teams have from one another. All these graphics, fully interactive, all these graphics, you can click on them, click different teams, highlight different things, highlight multiple teams if you want to. Very cool at NFLproject.com. Play around with it. We're going to keep talking about them because they're obviously very relevant right now. All right, let's jump right into the meat and potatoes part of this podcast. This is the most fun for me because I get to break down these games for you and talk to you a little bit about them. One thing I will note, every single one of you guys who is listening to this podcast right now should have client access this week to all my NFL information. One of the things I always do for my clients is I give them a table. It's a color-coordinated table listing all the comparisons for all the teams as they matched up against one another. It's pretty much a blueprint to everything I'm going to walk through with you in this segment. So you're going to want to get that since you have free access to it this week. So here's the steps to do that. First of all, go to sharpfootballanalysis.com, go to the purchase page. Get the package that is $1. That's what the purchase price is. Again, as I mentioned before, you have to sell something there for a particular price. I can't just post something for free to check out through the store. So it is a package called Special NFL Only Week 10 Free Preview Package. It's $1. I'll refund it on Monday. So you're really not going to be paying anything for it. It truly will be free, but it costs $1 just to do the process. At that point in time, you'll be able to go to your client page. And on your client page, once you log in, off to the right, you'll see a section called NFL Announcements. In that section, there will be a password and a link that you can go to the blog and actually be able to enter that password to get access to this graphic. It's a graphic. You can just click on it, blow it up, and review it, and print it out or open it on your computer, whatever you want to do. But that's the blueprint as we talk through these games. So if you don't have that yet, but you're interested, just hit pause, take those steps, go to the blog, type in the password, it'll unlock that image, and you'll be able to get access to it. That's what I give to my clients every single week, and they can walk through these with me. But it's obviously very helpful to have this in front of you as I'm talking through these things, and you can use it on your own as well to study and break these games down however you wish. With that said, the way we're going to work through these games, as always, is in order of that document that you now have access to. So starting at the top, obviously Thursday night game, and then we'll work in the order of that document. The Thursday night game, Saints at the Panthers. I mentioned earlier in this podcast, this was the game where we saw a big discrepancy in early down success rate, and you can see it right there. The Saints were second best, the Panthers were second worst. There were only 24 teams playing last week, so 23rd is the second worst. We saw a big difference there. Obviously, that translated into the big difference on the scoreboard. Both the teams had 2 turnovers, so turnovers did not decide this game. 2 factors that decided this game, and both of them, obviously in addition to early down success rate, both of them were play from the quarterback. The New Orleans Saints quarterback, Drew Brees, got some tremendous productivity, 71% completions, that was second best in the league, 7.9 yards per attempt, that was 5th best in the league. The burden fell entirely to him because they could not run the ball at all, only 2.8 yards per carry. Now they ran it and ran it and ran it again because they controlled the clock. They had the second most time of possession. They made a point to let the running back run the ball a little bit more frequently on the road to take it out of Drew Brees' hands a little bit. However, that worked great at the beginning. It worked a little bit worse at the end of the game. Obviously, it became less important and less relevant for them to gain yardage at the end of the game because they were winning by such a margin. However, on third down, they were money. They converted 54% of their third downs, and oftentimes those were third and mediums because that run game wasn't gaining a whole lot on first and second down, and so came in. It was on Breeze to complete those passes, and he did. Unlike Drew Brees, Cam Newton did not perform well, and this was one of the reasons my numbers actually leaned a little bit to the over, but I didn't make a play on this game at all, and the reason was I had no confidence that Cam Newton in that offense, even against his bad Saints defense, was going to be able to put up points. I know that Drew Brees does not play as well on the road as he does at home, but I still had confidence against this really terrible Carolina Panthers defense. Even on the road, he would be able to produce, but I had no confidence even against the Saints' bad defense that Cam Newton has shown me anything the last few weeks to lead me to believe that he would be able to produce, and sure enough, 36% completions, that was worst in the league. He was second worst in the league in yards per pass attempt and passer rating. So very poor performance there. They had the second worst early down success rate. Not very good at all. Moving along to the Bengals at the Jaguars, next game on the board. In this game, we saw very impressive performance from both of the running attacks. I was pretty surprised to see that both of these guys ran for over 5.3 yards per carry. That was number 1 and number 2 in the league this past weekend. So we know the Bengals' run defense is not all that great, but the Jaguars were able to post numbers much better than normal for them, and the Jaguars allowed the Bengals to post 5.6 yards per carry. That helped open things up in the passing game, and I was very impressed by Blake Bortles. He was able to pass for 67% completions and post a 95 passer rating, even with an interception, because he did have 2 passing touchdowns. So those are very good, strong marks for him. Very high scoring game. The reason it was high scoring, again, both these run games were gaining yards at a clip, and that helped the teams earn 6.3 and 6.1 yards per play. Both of those numbers are top 4 in the league last week. So these teams are rattling off large chunks every time they're snapping the ball. And they were pretty efficient, although not tremendous, but pretty good inside the red zone. A total combined of 5 of 8 inside the red zone. So pretty good overall performance and amounted to 56 points on the scoreboard at the end of the day. In a game that the Jaguars did cover very close, but they got the cover there. They trailed. They were actually leading after the first quarter by 3 points, and then they trailed by 9 points at halftime and after the third quarter and hung on as they were a 10.5 or 11-point underdog. Looking at the team that is going to take on the Cincinnati Bengals on Thursday, and that's the Cleveland Browns. They hosted the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and this game was a very low-scoring defensive game, which was a little bit interesting and somewhat surprising to me. More surprising, though, was the fact that the Cleveland Browns could not run the ball at all on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We know that the Cleveland Browns lost center Alex Mack, but Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense has not been very good this season, and the Cleveland Browns only gained 1.8 yards per carry. That was a big difference. Obviously, that was the worst in the league this past week, but that was a big difference in terms of this game and the way that this game played out, because they were unable to pull away and maintain any type of lead in this game because they could not run the ball with any efficiency, and thus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers played well enough to earn the cover in this spot. When you look at the passing, that's really where this offense came from for the Cleveland Browns. Brian Hoyer, 280 passing yards. Usually he's not throwing the ball 34 times, but in this particular game, he had to throw it 34 times because they could not get anything out of that running attack. He did complete 62% of his passes, which is about average, but 8.2 yards per attempt. Very strong numbers there. Made do with some receivers that probably would not be on starting rosters on other teams. So pretty impressed with what the passing offense is able to do there in Cleveland, particularly without a good running game to speak of. Both these teams failed in the red zone, a total of 1 for 4 combined, so this game fell under the total. Not really much else to speak of here in this spot. The Bucs definitely deserved a cover here, so I'm glad for them that they got it, but they were not able to pull off the win, and now they're switching back to Josh McCown as a quarterback. Looking at the Jets over at Kansas City. The Jets went out to Kansas City, and I was pretty impressed by one phase of the Jets and pretty disappointed with another. The part I was impressed with actually is not their defense, it was their offense. Their offense actually performed very well. 5th best early down success rate, 5th best completion percentage from the quarterback, 7th best passer rating. And when you were passing the ball and being able to do some things offensively, that also helps out your run game. And your run game gained 4.6 yards per carry. That was 6th best in the league. So their offense, despite, maybe Mike Vick obviously did a little bit better than Geno Smith, at least in this particular game. But the numbers aren't going to surprise you. They only put up 10 points in this game, but this week, I got some interesting information. I'm going to share this and save this portion for the client-only topic since it's free this week. I don't feel bad about keeping it there for one of my write-ups, but there's a really interesting wrinkle that happened in that game last week against the Chiefs that I think is going to really help us out with some future value. So you're going to want to go ahead and get that information for free from the website in terms of reading one of my write-ups here shortly. Look at both the passing offenses. Both teams passed for 67, 68%, very strong. Both teams had top 7 passer ratings, so very efficient performance. And then I was disappointed with the Jets defense. They allowed the Chiefs to convert 62% of third downs, so not very good there. The Chiefs got into the red zone 4 times, scored 3 touchdowns, won very handily a 24-10 victory. But there's some interesting things there. Like I said, I won't discuss that anymore. Go check it out on the website in one of the write-ups when I get that up there. Moving to the Cowboys versus the Cardinals. This was a game, I guess one of the first games on the board here, at least on the sheet that I was on. I was on the Cardinals in the over in the spot. I took the Cardinals when they were a +3. They obviously closed as a favorite in this game when the news was announced that Tony Romo was not going to be playing in this particular game. Now, when you look at this game, some things to note. Obviously, first of all, Carson Palmer's passer rating, 102. That was very strong. Compare that to what they got out of Brandon Weeden, just a 54. So not very good passer rating. The second thing, and this is one of the things I definitely predicted in my write-up, and my client saw this, was that I indicated that once the Cowboys' offense is not chewing up the clock, that their defense is going to start to get exposed. What have I told you guys for weeks now about the Arizona Cardinals? Their red zone offense stinks. They cannot produce inside the red zone. They got down to the Cowboys' red zone 4 times and scored touchdowns every single time down there. Very strong performance from them in terms of the red zone offense. And so that speaks to me. It's not something that they just changed and all of a sudden they're a great red zone offense. I would assume they should be able to get better as the season goes on, but this is on the Cowboys' defense and not being able to keep them outside of the red zone. Now, the Cowboys' offense obviously struggled. You can see their passing numbers. And as a result, they only made it down to the red zone 3 times because they only converted 27% of their third downs. And they were only 1 of 3 when they got into the red zone. They also missed a field goal attempt, which would have cut the game to a 1-score game. They obviously lost 28-17. The field goal occurred earlier in the game, of course, but could have been down 28-20 later in the game had they not missed that field goal. So at any rate, this is a game I leaned on the over here. I took the over. It did hit. It ended up being closer than I would have liked. It was easy at halftime. Teams had put up some good points at halftime, but did not score a single point in the third quarter, which definitely made things for a nail-biter towards the end of the game. Jumping down to the Dolphins and the Chargers, this was another game I was on the side in the total for this one. I was on the Dolphins in this spot, and I even got a tweet. Why are you taking the Dolphins here? The Dolphins are if you've been listening to this podcast, the Dolphins are pretty much the best. They're the number 1 early down success rate team in my rankings. They are good offensively in early down success rate. They are good defensively in early down success rate. They are getting better every single week offensively. So this is a team I think is surging at this moment in time, and I played on that, took them in this spot. Now, I was also on the over in this game, and certainly a very frustrating game for myself, and I was getting many tweets during the game. This is the worst. This game is so terrible. Over is the right side. I don't know why there's not scoring the points. If you look at this game, the San Diego Chargers put up 37 points in the game, and that was the Miami Dolphins. Miami Dolphins, obviously, not the Chargers. They scored nothing. Helped us out, zilch. The Miami Dolphins scored 37 points in this game, and they did that even despite going 3 of 7 inside the red zone. That is terrible. 3 of 7 inside the red zone, 43%. The Chargers, I had written in the write-up leading into this, that the Chargers, they don't allow teams into their red zone very much. One of the best teams, one of the best defenses going in terms of preventing teams from getting into the red zone. But what did I say in my write-up? I said the Dolphins are going to get in there, and they're going to get in there often. When they get in there, the Chargers defense was the worst in the league. They were allowing 86% touchdowns inside of their red zone. So they prevented you from getting there, but once you got down there, they were just like opening the valve on a fire hydrant and just letting everything through. So the Chargers were bad inside the red zone defensively. Dolphins only 3 of 7. We only needed 1 more touchdown in this game to at least push. We had 44 on the total, so that was very frustrating. And then equally as frustrating, both teams pulled their quarterbacks through the fourth quarter. Nobody was trying to score any more points. The Chargers basically gave up after Phillip Rivers had his elbow hit. They probably would have pulled him anyway since the game was completely out of control. And so no points scored at all in the fourth quarter. Obviously, this game is not going to go over the total when you're basically, there's no way for me to account for 2 backup quarterbacks playing an entire quarter of a football game. But that's exactly what we saw here. I did not expect the Chargers to score nothing in this game, of course. I certainly plan on them contributing. They had 4 turnovers. Ironically, there was no touchdown returns to put up these 37 points for the Dolphins. Every single point came from them based on their offense, even though they only scored 3 touchdowns from inside the red zone on 7 trips. So very, very strong performance from them. Ryan Tannehill, 116 passer rating, 67% completions. He also added yardage running the ball. So the Dolphins overall posted the second best yards per play at 6.0 yards per play. Very strong there. When you look at the Chargers, just disappointing across the entire board. Fewest first downs, worst early down success rate. 3rd fewest red zone numbers in terms of their performance there. Obviously, they didn't even get to the red zone at all. 0 red zone trips for the San Diego Chargers this entire game. Phillip Rivers, pass rating of 16. I don't even know if Geno Smith could do that if he tried, or E.J. Manuel. but 16 of as his passer rating, 3 interceptions, 50% completions. Now, granted, some of these numbers are from the backup who got significant time there in the fourth quarter, but bottom line here, league's worst yards per play. The Chargers just were not in a good spot here, and the Dolphins really showed up really strong for this game. The 49ers came off their bye and just stunk up the joint against the Rams. The main problem for the 49ers was their offense, particularly with regard to their run game. They could only run for 3.8 yards per attempt, and Colin Kaepernick only 5.5 yards per pass attempt. That was a terrible performance from both units offensively. Ended up ranking as the 4th worst offensive yards per play of the entire weekend. Now, it's not like the St. Louis Rams set the world on fire here. It's not like they won the game because of turnovers. Both teams had 2 turnovers in this spot. One key turnover for the 49ers in terms of the time of the game is what cost them the win. They fumbled the ball, obviously, heading into the end zone with several seconds left on the clock. That would have won the game for the San Francisco 49ers. Instead, Colin Kaepernick fumbles it and is recovered in the end zone by the Rams, and the Rams win the game. Pretty dramatic ending to this one. Very heartbreaking, I'm sure, for a lot of the 49ers fans because it really does put them out of the playoffs. I think there's going to take a long shot for them to get their way back into it. They're not eliminated by any stretch of the imagination, but they are really on the outside looking in, going to need a lot of help along the way as a result. This game, total of 13 punts. That was the most punts of any game that we've seen this weekend, so pretty pathetic performance. It's not as if the St. Louis Rams have a very good defense. Their defense is not very good this year. Why in the world do the 49ers not put up better numbers? It's hard to say. Colin Kaepernick completed 67% of his passes, but they only got down to the red zone twice. They had the 2nd worst third down conversion rate. The Rams had the 3rd worst early down success rate. So these teams just played a very bad game, and somehow this ineffective pass rush of the Rams was able to sack Colin Kaepernick 8 times. This is supposedly a mobile quarterback who should be able to elude these guys a little bit faster. I don't know if it's his body configuration, and he's tall and lanky, and so it takes him longer time to move his legs. When he gets going, he's like a gazelle, but in the short range stuff, he has trouble avoiding pass rushers. I really don't know what the problem is with him, but he seems very uncomfortable in the pocket and not making very quick decisions, and that's why he's giving the pass rushers extra time to get there and to sack him. It's not like he doesn't have good wide receivers. They've got a number of very good wide receivers there, so definite troubles brewing in San Francisco. The most exciting, one of the best games of the weekend, of course, at least in the first half, let's say, at least in the first quarter, maybe, we'll say, before it got blown up, was the Patriots at the Broncos. This, I guess we could definitely say it was the most hyped game of the weekend. And this game was pretty interesting. The Broncos, there was a number of things the Broncos did very good in this game from an efficiency perspective. But they had some bad time turnovers. They gave the Patriots a return touchdown. Obviously, Julian Edelman ran one back for a touchdown at a key moment in the game. And, their defense, the Broncos lost this game, I think in large part because of their defense. So let's look at these things. First of all, Denver Broncos, what do they do good? Offensively, very efficient from a yards per play standpoint. 6.3 yards per play overall, and that was 2nd best in the league. Now, you look at their numbers and you can say, well, neither of their numbers were all that good. They only ran for 2.5 yards per carry. That's terrible. 3rd worst of any team this week. And they only passed for 7.5 yards per pass attempt, which was 8th best. So how does that combine to form the 2nd best yards per play rank? The answer is simple. Look at how it's weighted. They called only 15 run plays, and they had Peyton Manning pass the ball 57 times. So when you're passing it 57 times and averaging 7.5 yards per attempt, even if that's not a good number, you're basically hardly ever running. And so therefore, your numbers are going to be skewed towards what you're able to accomplish passing the ball. So a very lopsided performance from the Broncos. They got their offense out of the pass game. They could not run the ball against the New England Patriots, which was very interesting because the New York Jets went into New England and had no problem running the ball and controlling the clock on the Patriots. So somehow this Patriots team and Bill Belichick just knows how to play Peyton Manning, and I think it's got to be really frustrating for them, but I do not think that this Patriots defense is as good as how they looked in this game. They just really know how to play these Denver Broncos well, and that's what ended up happening. Now, on the flip side, talk about a team that doesn't know how to play their opponent well, and that would be the Denver Broncos. They allow the 2nd most first downs to the New England Patriots at 29, and this was an interesting game because Tom Brady, he didn't light the world on fire either, only 6.3 yards per pass attempt, and they couldn't run the ball either, only 2.6 yards per carry. So it wasn't a dominant offensive performance, but what ended up happening was, based upon some field position and some well-timed plays, the Patriots had 5 red zone trips, and the Broncos only had 4. But listen to this. The Patriots had 4 goal-to-go situations. The Broncos only had 2. And in those goal-to-goal situations, the Patriots scored every single time. They went 4-4. When the Broncos had goal-to-go, they only scored 1 out of 2 times. So when you're making your way into the opponent's 10-yard line 4 times and scoring touchdowns every single time, and the Broncos can only get down there twice and they only score 1 of the 2 times, that's going to be a big part of the difference. Then you factor in the punt return, the kick return for the non-offensive touchdown, and you're building your way towards a 22-point victory for the New England Patriots. So very interested to see the matchup here in the rematch. But one key takeaway, neither team could run the ball at all on their opponent. It fell onto the quarterbacks. Both quarterbacks passed over 53 times. Pretty ridiculous the way that these guys were passing the ball around out there, but that's what it took because they couldn't run the ball. Looking at a game, by the way, on that Patriots-Broncos game, I did like the Broncos in the spot, and I also liked the over. The weather was a factor, and so I waited for that to get bet down, and took it at the last moment. Got over on that one, and that was one of the easiest bets of the day was betting that over. Key is timing the market, knowing when to get involved, and that's obviously relevant for my clients and for you guys placing your bets on your own as well. Looking at the Seahawks and Raiders, this game, interesting game. I was actually on the Raiders in this spot. I took them at 14 when they were catching 14.5 points, and obviously we know sharp money came in and the line closed, I think, below 13, but this was a game that the Seahawks got out to a pretty commanding lead. And I said in the Inside the Isolator article last week, I really was going to challenge the Seattle Seahawks. They really have to come out and prove it to me in this game. They really have to bring back that intensity, that attitude that they used to have and just demolish the Raiders. But I bet against them thinking that they weren't going to be able to do that. And certainly up by 21 at halftime, it looked like they were capable of it. But they let the Raiders come back in to the game. It was not a very good pass performance by the Raiders. You could see 41 pass attempts, only 4.6 yards per attempt. The Raiders couldn't run the ball either, only 2.1 yards per carry. But they made the most of it when they went into the Seahawks red zone. They only did it twice. They scored touchdowns both times. And the Seattle Seahawks, one of the reasons I was betting the Raiders was not because I love the Raiders. It's because the Seahawks offense is struggling, and they struggled against even a mediocre to bad Raiders defense. Only 5.1 yards per pass attempt, only 3.9 yards per run attempt. They did feed Marshawn Lynch left and right, 38 total rush attempts. That was more than their pass attempts of 35 in this game. So that was good looking for the Seattle Seahawks to get Lynch back involved some. But they only performed 19th best in terms of early down success rate offense, and obviously that was a factor in this game as well. Both teams had a return touchdown, non-offensive touchdown in this game, and obviously the Raiders got this game really close at the end, onside kick away from trying to take the lead, but they ended up losing it by 6, easily cashing the bet for us on that one. But it was it didn't look good early, but certainly came around late. Okay, let's fly through this last 3 games here. We've got first up the Steelers and the Ravens. This game, Ravens looked good early, did not look good after that, and obviously were blown out of the water in this spot. They were down by 12 at the half and ended up losing by 20. They were actually winning by 7 at the end of the first quarter in what was looking to be a little bit of a closer, tighter ball game. Both quarterbacks played extremely well in this game, which is a testament to both pass defenses. Joe Flacco, 67% completions. Ben Roethlisberger, 68% completions. Now, Ben did have a better yards per pass attempt. He was able to complete more of his passes down the field. Joe Flacco, after being rattled there early in the game, was not able to look downfield, was not able to have as much time. I think some of that was on him. Maybe some of it was on the offensive line. Either way, Ben had the best yards per pass attempt in the league. The Ravens down at 17th. Look at passer rating, Ben's was 134. We know this before I said it. He passed for 6 touchdowns again this week. Excellent performance offensively from them. The Ravens only converted on 23% of their third down attempts. They also had 2 turnovers, only got 1 back from the Steelers. So they did have a non-offensive touchdown, a kickoff return. After the Steelers scored a touchdown, Ravens came right back and returned a kickoff in for a touchdown. So if it wasn't for that, it would have been even more lopsided for the Steelers. And this is just a team that when you have a bad defense, if you have issues in your secondary, this Steelers team can just pick you apart. They've gotten very acclimated at that. They couldn't even run the ball, 2.2 yards per attempt. So no running, but that didn't matter to this team. They were able to just pass the ball all over the Baltimore Ravens secondary. Looking at the Eagles and the Texans. Oh, in that game, I like the Ravens and the over. Obviously was wrong on the Ravens, obviously right on the over. Looking at the Eagles and the Texans, this is a game, I took the Eagles in this game, and obviously that game, they got the cover there. It was a close game throughout, not a huge margin there, but after the third quarter, the Eagles were up by 10, and they maintained that lead, ended up winning by 10. Great performance by the combination of quarterbacks for the Eagles. Obviously, Sanchez played some, Foles played some, 71% completions, best in the NFL, 8.4 yards per attempt, second best in the NFL. That opened things up for the run game, so they were able to pass the ball effectively. And the big thing for the Eagles, will they perform in the red zone? Same thing what we have with the Arizona Cardinals. These are teams that are bottom of the red zone rankings offensively. Could they get touchdowns? They got down there 3 times, scored touchdowns every single time. 4th best third down conversion rate, 4th best early down success rate. Very, very strong overall performance for the Philadelphia Eagles in this game. Now, they did have 4 turnovers, so it's pretty remarkable. You're able to win the game on the road by 10 points. When I think the line was basically, I don't know, it might have closed Eagles -2, I guess, but it was close to a pick 'em for a while there. Eagles, 4 turnovers, only get 1 back in return, and yet win the game by 10 points. That speaks some to the Texans, who very poor performance from Fitzpatrick in terms of his completion rate, 48%. That was second worst in the league, and they only had 15 first downs. That was third worst in the league. But the Eagles, obviously a very strong performance from them, and they've now, as I said earlier, have peaked and are taking over the number 2 seed from the Dallas Cowboys, who are obviously struggling. And then jumping down to the last game, the Washington Redskins at the Minnesota Vikings. Early in this game, it looked like the Redskins were going to be the better team. The Vikings ended up coming back late and winning the game. My numbers like the Redskins in this game, but I didn't feel fully confident RG3 being back there. The line was really short. So I ended up in this spot actually teasing the Washington Redskins, who were a small dog, up through the 3 and the 7. And so that cashed for clients. And in this game here, when you look at it, the Redskins allowed the Vikings to go 3 of 3 inside the red zone. The Redskins went 3 of 5 inside the red zone. Just an interesting performance. I mean, RG3, his first game back, there was a lot of these ridiculous reports on ESPN. I was watching, couldn't believe my eyes and my ears when I was seeing that a lot of turmoil in the Redskins locker room, and they hate RG3, and they were interrupting his press conference, chanting, and he had to leave the room to go conduct his press conference. All these ridiculous accusations. I texted my buddy Doc Walker on with the team, covers the team, former Redskin, and talked to some other guys, and they're all like, "No, this is ridiculous. Not true whatsoever." The team loves RG3. They're happy he was back, and sure enough, they played well with him in there. 8 yards per pass, and that was a windy, kind of blustery day up in the outdoors, up in Minnesota, cold and a little bit windy. RG3, 8 yards per pass attempt. The team was able to run the ball for 4.2 yards per rush. Top 10, not anything great. Overall, their yards per play, 5.6. It was 8th best in the league. Certainly better than what the Vikings were, which was 5 yards per play. But RG3 did throw a costly interception in the game. That certainly played a factor. Now, you could say that one interception is certainly a lot better than what Colt McCoy was throwing to the Dallas Cowboys, or what Kirk Cousins, who loves to throw interceptions every other pass if he can. RG3's numbers were improved over those 2 quarterbacks. So even though he did throw that interception, I think his overall performance was better than those other guys. And I think Colt McCoy had a great game, but you're not going to be able to forecast he's going to have games like that the rest of the season. RG3 is your guy. You got to see what he can do, and hopefully he can get in the groove with this offense and start performing well. Very tight game, back and forth. I was surprised at how high scoring this one was. My computer algorithm did not have a play on the under here, but I actually made a personal play on the under based on some of the analytics and the matchups here, thinking this game would be lower scoring, and certainly the game looked to be going that way. If you look at the game at halftime, at the end of the first quarter, it was just 3-0. At halftime, it was 10-7. So not a whole lot there. Obviously, well below the first half total, but the teams put up 17 points in the third quarter and then 21 in the fourth quarter to send this game over the total. So that play did not hit for us. But overall, another winning week in the NFL, and obviously looking forward to a lot on the card this week. There's a number of spots I've already circled, and I've actually already released one play to clients. So that's out there as well. And again, you got to get on board this week. But that's a run through the games for this past week. Let's look ahead to the future games. Let's go ahead and break down some of these games right now for the upcoming Week 10 slate. Normally what I do right now is I jump into some injuries, but I don't want to waste time doing that this week. We'll touch back on that next week, and hopefully moving forward we'll have time. But let's focus on these upcoming games. I do want to reiterate, though, if you are interested in trying to take a look at what I provide clients on a weekly basis, how my recommendations look, what my releases look like, all my write-ups and the information that I share, this is the week this year. NFL is absolutely free. You go to the website, purchase that package. It's $1. You'll get that refunded on Monday. You'll be able to get every single release and recommendation that I put out there. I encourage you, though, don't wait. Don't waste time. I've already got one release out there, and I'm going to be issuing additional recommendations over the course of the next several days. I do not wait until Sunday at 11 or 12 to put everything out there. I've got a lot on the table before we even get to Sunday, so you don't want to miss out on that. Jumping into this Thursday night game, Cleveland at Cincinnati, the key to this matchup that I'm really interested to look at is how often is Cleveland going to run the ball. I can go ahead and tell you that Week 7 against the Jaguars, they ran for 2.3 yards per carry, worst in the week. Week 8 against the Raiders, they ran for 1.6 yards per carry, worst in the week. Week 9, they ran for 1.8 yards per carry against the Bucs, worst in the week. This run offense without Alex Mack in there is miserable. The question becomes, how often are they going to continue running it? Because ironically, they actually run it the third most often of any team in the league, and even when they're trailing, they still are running it the second most of any team who runs it when they're trailing. So this is a very unique situation. They, unlike the Dallas Cowboys, for instance, who are the league's most frequent run team, particularly when they're trailing, they run it more so than any other team. They actually have a good run offense. The Cleveland Browns do not, yet they are trying to be very balanced for Brian Hoyer and hit these bigger chunk plays in the passing game. Really interested to see how they stick with the run game if they get down against the Bengals and how this game plays out. Very important game in that division. Looking at the game in London, let's skip right over that. We don't know if Tony Romo is or is not playing. I do think this is like Jacksonville Super Bowl. They're not going to be in any primetime spots in terms of nobody's going to be looking for them when they come back to the States to do anything. This is their spot to really make some noise and bring an upset if they've got it. So I think that they're really jacked up for this game. Dallas has got to be really trying to get that bad taste out of their mouth, losing 2 straight games at home. So this is a must-win game for them over there in versus Jacksonville in London. So I think it adds a little bit more intrigue to a game than if these two teams, say, met over there in week 3 or 4. But should not be like the marquee game of the day. I'm definitely not looking forward to seeing that game, but I'll definitely keep close tabs on it because we don't have all that many 1 o'clock games given all the buys. Look at the next game on the board. This and there's one other game I'll get to in a second. My favorite games are the 1 o'clock slate. Miami at Detroit. I can tell you the clients, I've already got a play on this game. I've got a recommendation on the website with a very, very lengthy write-up going over everything I think that's going to happen in this game from a matchup perspective as it relates to the recommendation that I've released. So I'm not even going to waste any time talking about this game, but I love some of the matchups and the dynamics of this game. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. I don't want to tease it anymore, though, so just go check that out on the website. Again, you can look at it for free and see the write-up. Kansas City at Buffalo. This is a sneaky game because the Kansas City Chiefs really aren't blowing teams out of the water unless they're doing it defensively, scoring points that way. Their offense is not really built to really dominate a team and really put up points in bunches very quickly. I think the Bills' defense is good enough to hang and keep this thing somewhat close. The question mark then becomes, can the Bills' offense do anything against this Kansas City defense? And is Sammy Watkins playing or is he not? Because he hurt his groin in practice today. I'm recording this Wednesday night, so will he play or not? It's totally to be determined. This next game, I think, is the best other game other than this Miami-Detroit game. From an intrigue standpoint, the 49ers and the New Orleans Saints, obviously, both teams in desperate need of a win. That performance by the 49ers, no matter how you look at it, offensively, defensively, coaching, quarterbacking, was abysmal, pathetic, embarrassing, and couldn't have ended in a more appropriate manner by them fumbling the ball into the end zone on the final play of the game, basically, when they could have won the game by 4 points, and they end up fumbling it away and lost by 3. Very appropriate for the way they played that entire game. Very fitting and deserving of them to suffer that loss. That said, we'll have to see how they respond because now they're playing a New Orleans Saints team that is living on past reputation. This defense is not all that great. Green Bay marched the ball up and down the field on them. Now, obviously, Green Bay's offense is a lot better than this 49ers offense. So I really want to see this game. I want these teams from the past to come back out. I want them to poke their head out from the shell that they've been hiding in. And I want to see the 49ers hit some people defensively. I want to see Colin Kaepernick scrambling around a little bit. I want to see Drew Brees pushing the ball down the field. I want to see some activity from these teams instead of this shell that they've been in. One of these teams is going to improve to 5-4. The other one's going to drop to 4-5. Must-win game for both teams. Think it's going to be fascinating. Tennessee at Baltimore, not really interested too much in this game. The one thing I will say about this matchup is that the Baltimore Ravens historically have done very well at home, trying to pick up wins after they've lost games. They're obviously much better at home. When Joe Flacco has a bad game on the road, they typically come back very strong at home and perform well. Tennessee is starting Mettenberger. They're off of a bye. I told you earlier how being off of a bye doesn't really help teams, but it is a young quarterback, and it probably can't hurt him at all, knowing that he's got to sit through this bye and he's going to be starting next week. You know his mind has got to be focused on this game, as long as he's not taking selfies anymore and shaving his mustache and trying to look like some film characters. He's got to be a little bit more serious about his profession, like J.J. Watt said. But at any rate, very difficult spot for the Tennessee Titans offense. The only good news is that Jimmy Smith for the Baltimore Ravens is out again this week. And if you could pass the ball, if he gets enough protection in the pocket, he stands in there. He'll take shots, but he will still get the ball out. He does not care about getting hit. I'm intrigued to see how he fares here in Baltimore. It should be very telling. If he's able to do some things against this Baltimore Ravens team, I'm worried about the Ravens moving forward. If the Ravens come in here and shut them down, then I have a feeling that the Ravens are probably going to be a team that really is to be reckoned with this postseason. But if they can't get that turned around and it starts this week, concerns about them. Look at the Steelers and the Jets. Very interesting matchup here because the Steelers have been absolutely rolling, but the New York Jets are kind of, I don't want to say you're flying under the radar, but the problem for the Jets is their defense stinks, especially in the secondary. It's miserable. Their offense has been up and down, but lately they've kind of been up. Granted, they had a terrible game against the Bills last time they were at home, but the week before that up in New England and last week out in Kansas City, their offense actually was not terrible. So I'm really interested to see how they do, because this Steelers team, as much as the media wants to pump them up and hype them up and say that their defense is back and all this other nonsense, I don't really think that defense is back. It's probably not going to show against the New York Jets. However, that said, I'm glad this game is just a regular 1 o'clock game, because I'm sick and tired of hearing announcers in prime time see the Steelers come out flat and look bad early and start ripping the Steelers about how they're bad and how they need to win and how they need to do all these different things. Then the Steelers come back, get a few turnovers, and start blowing teams out of the water, putting up all these points. The announcers start falling in love with with the Steelers. It's just ridiculous. The announcers have no real objective opinions, that they can't just tell you factually what's going on and offer concise, simple opinions. They've got to be hating you or loving you, and so dramatic, it's ridiculous, especially with a team like the Steelers where it goes back and forth so quickly. At any rate, they're flying banners around the practice facility telling the team to fire the general manager for the Jets. I don't want to see what's going to happen there. It's kind of like a circus if the Jets do lose this game in a bad way, but I think the Jets have the tools here to stay with the Steelers. I don't know why, but I think they definitely do, and the Steelers sometimes do show up flat. This could be one of those times. We'll have to see. Jumping ahead, Atlanta, Tampa Bay. Interesting game. Not really sure what I think about this game, though, so I'm not really going to spend a whole lot of time discussing it. Both these teams obviously struggling this year. Both these teams bad records. So let's move on. Denver at Oakland. I love the fight I saw out of the Oakland Raiders coming back after being down against the Seattle Seahawks, bringing everything together. They were down by over 20 points and coming out and almost trying to win that game at the end. That shows a lot of heart, a lot of guts. Question is, how much in the rain, in that stadium, in that environment, did it take out of this team? Because now they have to hang with the Denver Broncos, whose offense is much better than the Seattle Seahawks. I'm excited to see this game from that perspective. I want to see what this Oakland Raiders offense and defense bring to the table, and I want to see how Denver responds to that big loss against Tom Brady. St. Louis at Arizona. Would have been a better spot to look at the Rams had they not upset the 49ers, but given the fact that they did, Arizona, I've been probably, from people who I pay attention to, listen to, and hear in the media and on different other media formats, I've been beating the drum for Bruce Arians for years now, and you guys have heard it all year long on this podcast about how highly I regard Bruce Arians and how much I think of him, but I've been saying this now for years, and clients will remember that. I really think Bruce Arians is quite the offensive mind and is in tune with his team, a really good players coach. It's going to be hard for me to go against Bruce Arians in this particular spot, but 7 points is a big number, so I'm probably going to stay away from that game. We'll have to see. The Giants at the Seahawks. I don't really want to have anything to do with either of these teams, to be honest. Seattle shouldn't be laying over 10 points to anybody in the NFL right now. The Giants look so miserable, can't get anything together off a bye. Not even worth spending another second on. Chicago, Green Bay. Fascinating game here. The Bears' defense is horrible, we know that, but the Bears' offense cannot be as bad as what they've looked. The Bears have the talent, the skill positions, the coaching, the ability to be a much better offense than what they've showed. They should be able to get that accomplished against this Green Bay defense. Question mark becomes Aaron Rodgers' hamstring. I'll go on record right now as saying that Green Bay plays in the cold in the NFC North. They face Chicago in the cold. They face Minnesota in the cold because Minnesota's not in the dome this year. They face anybody who comes to Green Bay in the cold. If you got a quarterback who's got a bulky hamstring, it's probably going to flare up at some point later on this season. So I would be absolutely shocked if Aaron Rodgers does not have another issue with this hamstring later this winter. It would really be surprising, because those types of things, especially with a quarterback who's moving around as mobile as he needs to be, do not just resolve themselves after a few days of rest on a bye week. So that's going to be interesting. And then, of course, ESPN, I don't know how much they paid the Houston Texans to knock Nick Foles out of that game, but they're going to make a lot more money now. Mr. Butt Fumble himself is headlining the Monday Night Football game. Mark Sanchez quarterbacking the Philadelphia Eagles against the struggling Cam Newton-led Carolina Panthers. Going to be a fascinating game to watch. I think there's storylines that abound from this game, multiple levels. Sanchez supposedly looked great during the preseason, has looked great during practices. Obviously, it's a different story during the game when the pressure's on there, but how will he look in this game? Can't wait to see it. Very excited to see all the primetime games on the card this week. Very excited to see a number of these 1 o'clock games as well. Not really intrigued by this 4 o'clock slate. The weakest 4 o'clock slate I've seen. You're talking about the Broncos and the Oakland Raiders, the Cardinals hosting the Rams, and these has-been teams of Seattle battling the New York Giants. That 4 o'clock slate is a snooze fest to me. Obviously, I'll be watching them because they'll probably have some action going on, but usually the 4 o'clock games, we've got some excellent games. Not so this week. So be ready for these 1 o'clock games. I think there are going to be a couple of good ones there. And then obviously the primetime games should be interesting. That's a wrap on the Week 10 Rearview Mirror podcast. Look forward to catching up with you Week 11 next week. Until then, stay safe and make sure you check out my free recommendations available to you this week. Go to the website, sharpfootballanalysis.com, and you can read all about them under the purchase page.
Come on. Run them jewels fast. Run them jewels fast. Run them.
play, do what I wanna do. I'm gonna say what I wanna say. Did I say anything stupid today? Tomorrow is to take the ball deep, take the top off the defense. To take the ball deep, take the top off the defense.
If I can't get to it, nobody can get to it.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie. Everybody, one clap, one clap, one clap, one clap.